there was some reason behind it, like would be inconvenient for her if he woke up.
I think there's definitely a lot of truth in that. I know with my experience was in each stage where things kind of changed or went wrong, it wasn't necessarily my doing. So the first time I was in a pool, I was going really well, labouring really fast, and I had a little bit of a show in the water. I had a young midwife who was concerned. She made me get out because she was concerned. I wasn't necessarily concerned, and there wasn't really anything that was to be concerned about. Then later on, I was obviously labouring more slowly because I was in a room that was really bright. I had doctors and nurses and who knows who else coming in and out, so I was quite disturbed. So everything was slow, and then they were telling me I was too slow, so they wanted to inject me with things, obviously to speed it up and make it happen more quickly to their time frame, because they must have had a time limit, and I'd taken too long to get to the stage that they expected me to be at. So medication was given to me, not necessarily that I wanted it. And it was done because they were trying to fit their sort of program that they have for women that are birthing, and they wanted me to fit those, tick those boxes a bit more quickly. So definitely I think happens for them rather than for us.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about what, like, the cascade of intervention and what that actually is for people who've never heard of that term before?
Yeah, of course.
Right. Well, let me see. Where does it start? Right. Where does it start? Quite often, I think it starts with women being tempted to have an induction. Because, in fact, 41% of caesareans are from failed inductions. So, women get told their due date, which I refer to as an estimated due date. But when people get told a due date, that's their expectation, especially when it's their first baby. And quite often they are tricked into having an induction. I know, because this happened with my daughter over in England. She had an induction, and she was actually given an induction on the day of 9/11. And her body shut down, even though she'd been given the induction drugs. All the people in the hospital, myself included, were all out in the waiting room watching the Twin Towers go down over and over again. And then we'd walk in and talk to my daughter. Of course, we weren't telling her what was happening out in the world, but of course she picked up on it. Her body picked up the fear pheromones. She smelt the fear on us, and her body closed down and wouldn't allow those induction drugs to work. So it was a 3-day labour, and it led from one thing to the other. So her body's closed down. They've given her another lot of induction drugs. Then she's had pethidine a couple of times, about 3 times I think, maybe more, lost track. She was given an epidural, and finally, when it was time to give birth to her son, who's now 16 years of age, she required ventouse suction. And I do remember the obstetrician saying to her, "Do you want me to do suction or do you want a C-section?" And my daughter said, "Oh, do the suction." And he did the suction, and back in those days, the suction cap had a metal ring on it. And he fitted it onto the baby's head, and it was a big man, and he heaved, and the suction cap came off. And then he reapplied it a bit roughly, and it cut all of the baby's head. So he had a huge big hematoma on his head when he was born. My daughter didn't see him for 3 days because he was put in the special care nursery. She was put in a single room, given a blood transfusion. He was too. First time I met my grandson was in the special care nursery, and I went and gave him a feed in his little nasogastric tube. And after day 3, my daughter was just beside herself of not seeing her baby, and I said to them, "I've got to get my daughter over to the special care nursery." "Oh, all right then." Eventually they got me a wheelchair, put my daughter in the wheelchair, wheeled her over there, and it was upper floor and across the corridor. It was like miles away. And we're going along this big long corridor. The midwife comes out because the wheelchair was squeaky. It was going squeak, squeak, squeak. And we didn't care because we were just getting my daughter to see her baby. So we get up to the special care nursery, and the midwife comes out and yells at us, "How dare you bring that chair here?" And it's like, well, we don't care. We're here, and my daughter wants to see her baby.
Yeah.
So finally, Tammy got to meet him, and it was,
Bittersweet.
bittersweet. Yes, absolutely. So that was how her cascade of interventions occurred. Hers didn't end up in a C-section, but quite often it
Mine
does.
And I was doing some research on like stretch and sweeps of the membrane, and I wasn't aware at the time that is actually an intervention.
That is
Yes.
actually the first stage
Yes.
of induction,
Yeah,
is this stretch and sweep.
and I'm sure a lot of women would say
Would
yes.
be unaware of that.
A lot of women don't
Yeah.
even. I don't remember really getting a choice.
Well, you don't, because what you think they're doing is a vaginal examination. You are totally unaware that they're doing a stretch and sweep.
Yeah.
And they do it unbeknownst to women.
Yeah,
So it often gets done. If you're at 40 weeks, they will definitely do
Yep.
the stretch and sweep.
and it seems normal now to just.
It's considered to be quite normal. That's
Yep.
right. And yet it is an intervention.
And I think, unfortunately, I don't have the data that I've read this from, but we need to be aware that we're not all made the same, and so different backgrounds will have different genetic programming, I suppose, for birth. And so a normal birth might be 40 weeks for some. Other people might need to go up to 41, 42 weeks gestation before that's considered to be a full pregnancy, a full labour term. So having everyone on this timeline of, okay, you hit 40 weeks, you've got a week, and then we're going to have to induce you. It's not allowing for that variation. So we're not all the same. Our ability to pinpoint the actual day of conception is not 100%, but we use that date and we calculate from that date that we've decided was the day that we conceived. We calculate from there that this is your 40-week mark, this is your induction mark. We don't know for sure if we've got the right date.
It's a one-size-fits-all.
It is, yeah.
It's not individual. During labour, some women actually adapt their behaviour to avoid interventions, such as delaying going to hospital, eating food prior to going to hospital so that they can't be given a caesarean, well, not under a general anaesthetic, not expressing how strong their surges were.
I must say that for myself, in my second, that was my strategy. I was so traumatised by my first birth that I actually didn't even want to go into a hospital, and I didn't tell anyone what I was going to do, but I had not planned to go in because I was that fearful of going in and having something done to me against my wishes as I had in my first. And the way that I planned this out for myself was that I was going to basically labour as long as I could at home, see how I was faring, and then perhaps just birth at home. Unfortunately, depends on the perspective, I guess. My second decided to come 3 weeks early, and I'm not a fool, I'm not going to take a risk with my child, so I decided to go in. But I didn't want to go in too quickly, so I literally was up until the last minute. I was in transition when I decided to leave home. And so when I got there was no time for anything. So that was probably my best strategy, and it worked really well for myself. I don't think, if I'd gone in earlier, I don't think I would have had such a successful story.
So many women believe that vaginal birth is a rite of passage. Did you feel
Absolutely.
that? Yes.
And I think you get in your mind after having a C-section, and I can't say this is for everyone, but for myself, you get in your mind that you failed, and you failed to become a mother, you failed to be able to birth your baby, and it's quite a psychological sort of mental trauma that you keep bringing it up as well. So sometimes I would find myself driving down the road, even a couple of years after having my first, and I'd be thinking about all the things that happened, and I'd feel such a sense of anger and such a sense of disappointment in myself. So, being able to have a full birth does help you to feel like a powerful mother, helps you to feel like you're strong enough to be able to face what you need to face when you're protecting your children.
So it's a healing experience.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what I was going to say now.
So the decision where to give birth was influenced by women's desire to avoid interventions in order to have more control over their birth choices. Women's reasons to VBAC at home in a HBAC, HBAC, women having a birth outside of the hospital, have high success rates. However, VBACs have a high transfer rates to hospital when it comes to home birth. Actually, I have a story that I would like to share with you, if I could find it.
Oh, something came up for me when you were talking before, Sandy. Oh, you found it now.
No, it's all right. You go.
Just when you were saying about like not allowing women or like women eat during labour so they can avoid a C-section, and I remembered at just what you said triggered it, and I must have suppressed this memory or something for so long. So my first and only birth that I've had was a C-section, and I remember I was induced for going post dates, and I remember all through my induction, the midwives or whoever was in the room, it was all a bit foggy, was just telling me I couldn't eat food, and I was so hungry, I just wanted to eat, and I think that maybe just getting that message that I can't eat, or maybe something will go wrong, maybe I'll need a C-section. I think that also sort of influenced the birth as well.
It does.
Absolutely.
It does, because they're suggesting the idea to you.
Yeah.
And you're also so exhausted that you don't have the energy by the end.
Yeah.
You're tired. You're malnourished, and you've not had enough to drink.
Women need to be able to eat and drink during
It's like a
labour if
marathon.
they want to.
It's a
If
marathon.
they want to, they don't have to, but if they want to,
yeah.
it's a choice once again. I have a lovely story that I'd like to share with you. A lady who was unable to be here today. This is Mo's story. In 2014, Mo and her partner prepared well for the birth of their first baby. They attended the Wise Hippo birthing program, 10 hours of postnatal education, hypnobirthing techniques and empowering information. After researching, Mo decided to have a home birth, so she booked into the Casey Hospital home birth program. When she was in labour at home, the midwives did not give her enough time, and so they called it a failure to progress. And then Mo was transferred to hospital, where she had an emergency C-section. Some time went by, and Mo was expecting her second baby. She wanted a VBAC. She did the Wise Hippo refresher course, and this time hired a doula to be her advocate, and made a birth plan. This time, she had a fabulous birth experience. Using the Wise Hippo tools, she toned while she laboured, remaining calm and relaxed. She felt a pop as the membrane released, and shortly after, her baby girl was born, quickly and easily, not crying. She appeared to be asleep, and then she woke to gaze intently at her mum and dad and brother. She had lots of vernix and a mop of dark hair. Parents desired their baby to have a lotus birth, and so 4 days later she did. Then parents, a year or so later, went for a holiday back over to New Zealand, and they took their children's 2 frozen placentas with them to bury them with the ancestors with great respect.
Oh, lovely.
In addition to VBACs, I just want to talk a little bit about birth trauma. When you were reading that story, Sandy, just that first birth where it was going to be home birth, and then she got transferred to hospital because of their time constraints, it just brought up a lot of anger in me. I think just because I've experienced birth trauma myself, and sometimes I wonder if that anger will go away. And I remember having a conversation with you both before this podcast, and I said, or somebody said, that birth trauma really is just a loss of power in birth. So when women, really regain that power and that control over their own birth and their own body and their experience, there seems to be, no trauma at all.
Mm-hmm. That's how it felt for me. I think for me, when I think back about my first, every time I think about the experience, I feel that a lot of decisions were taken out of my hands. I felt like I wasn't listened to. I felt like what I wanted wasn't important. And so when I think back on it, I feel very angry, and I feel that I wasn't able to exert my rights to a birth that I wanted. And so having the second birth the way it went has allowed me to feel that I did have a voice. It's given me back my power to say, no, this is what I want, this is what I'm doing.